Left Behind, Chapter 1, The Front Line. The sound of artillery fire filled the air, a deafening roar that shook the very ground beneath my feet. I crouched low in the muddy trench, my rifle gripped tightly in my hands. The rest of my squad was scattered around me, faces grim and resolute. We had been holding this position for days, repelling wave after wave of enemy assaults.
Incoming!
Someone shouted and we all braced ourselves. The explosion was massive. A blinding flash of light followed by a concussive blast that threw me off my feet. I felt a sharp pain in my head, then darkness. When I opened my eyes, everything was silent. The ringing in my ears gradually faded, replaced by the distant sounds of battle. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, unresponsive. Panic surged through me as I realized I couldn't feel my legs. I forced myself to calm down, taking deep, measured breaths.
Captain, are you alright?
It was Sergeant Thompson's voice, strained and urgent. I managed a weak nod. I think so. Can't move though. He cursed under his breath.
We need to get you out of here.
Before they could make a move, another barrage of artillery fire rained down on us. The world exploded into chaos once more, and I felt myself slipping into unconsciousness again. I drifted in and out of consciousness, catching glimpses of my squad trying to hold their ground. Faces blurred, voices distorted. They were talking about retreat, about falling back to a safer position. "We can't just leave him here," someone protested.
We have no choice.
Thompson said grimly.
He's dead weight right now, and we can't afford to carry him.
The words cut through me like a knife, but I couldn't muster the strength to respond. I felt hands on me, then nothing, as they left me behind. Chapter 2, Abandoned. I woke up to silence. The battle had moved on, the front line pushing further away. I was alone, the trench empty except for the bodies of my fallen comrades. Pain shot through my body as I tried to sit up, but I gritted my teeth and pushed through it. My head was pounding, but I forced myself to focus. The front line had indeed moved, leaving me behind enemy lines, so I needed to find a way back to my allies. I checked my gear, relieved to find my rifle and a few supplies still intact. Slowly, I climbed out of the trench, scanning the area for any signs of movement. The enemy could be anywhere, and I had to be careful. I moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows and avoiding open areas. The terrain itself was treacherous, filled with craters and debris from relentless bombardment. Every step was a painful reminder of my injuries, but I couldn't afford to stop. I scavenged what I could from the abandoned battlefield, collected rations, ammunition, and anything else that might be useful. As night fell, I found a small cave to take shelter in. I set up a rudimentary camp, using my knife to carve a small meal out of what I had scavenged. The night was cold, and I wrapped myself in my coat, trying to stay warm. I thought about my squad, wondering if they had made it to safety. Guilt gnawed at me for being left behind, but I knew it wasn't their fault. War was brutal, and tough decisions had to be made. Still, the loneliness was overwhelming, and I had to fight to keep the spirits up. Chapter 3, Scavenging. Days passed as I made my way through the war-torn landscape. I scavenged what I could from abandoned camps and wreckage, rationing my supplies carefully. Every step was a struggle, but I was determined to survive. I had time to think during those long, silent nights. Why had I enlisted in the first place? The promise of adventure and glory had seemed so appealing back then, but now, faced with the harsh realities of war, I couldn't help but question my decision. One afternoon, as I huddled in the ruins of an old building, I heard voices. Enemy soldiers were nearby, their laughter and conversation carrying through the still night air. I stayed hidden, my heart pounding in my chest. As I watched them from my hiding spot, observing their movements and listening to their conversations, they seemed relaxed, confident in their control of the area. It made me feel even more vulnerable, knowing that I was deep in enemy territory with no backup. During the next day, however, I tried to move quickly and quietly, avoiding patrols and trying to cover my tracks. I found an old farmhouse that had been abandoned, its roof partially caved in, and inside I discovered a hidden cellar stocked with preserved food and water. It felt like a miracle, and I took as much as I could carry. Each night, I retreated to a new hiding spot, never staying in one place for too long. The constant fear of discovery kept me alert, my senses heightened, as I started to feel like a hunted animal, always on the edge and ready to flee at a moment's notice. Chapter 4: The Enemy Hunt. The next morning, I discovered that the enemy had realized someone was behind their lines. They had started a hunt, searching the area for any sign of me. I had to be even more careful now, avoiding patrols and setting false trails to throw them off. I relied on my training and instincts, using the terrain to my advantage. I knew the area well. We have been fighting here for weeks before the explosions. I used every trick I knew to stay one step ahead of the enemy, but the constant tension was wearing me down. I found myself moving through dense forests, using the cover of the trees to stay hidden. The enemy patrols were relentless, combing the area with dogs and vehicles. I could hear them calling out to each other, their voices echoing through the trees. One afternoon, I stumbled upon a small river. The water was clear and cold, and I drank greedily, savoring the relief it brought. I followed it upstream, hoping it would lead me to a safe place to rest. As night fell, I found a secluded spot by the riverbank and set up camp. I built a small fire in a small hole, its warmth and light providing a momentary sense of comfort. The stars overhead were bright and clear, a stark contrast to the chaos of war that surrounded me. In the distance, I could hear the enemy's search parties. Their voices were growing fainter as they moved further away. I knew they wouldn't give up easily, but for now, I had a moment of peace. Chapter 5: The Outpost. As I navigated through a dense forest, I stumbled upon an old abandoned outpost. It was in ruins, but I found a hidden stash of supplies. Among them was a journal, filled with the scribbled notes of a long-gone soldier. Reading through it, I discovered that the outpost had once been a key strategic point. It gave me an idea. If I could activate the old communication equipment, I might be able to send a signal to my allies. It was risky, but I had nothing to lose. I spent the next few days repairing the equipment, working late into the night. Finally, I managed to get it working and sent out a coded message, praying it would reach the right people. While waiting for a response, I read more of the journal. The soldier had written about his experiences, his hopes and fears. It was a stark reminder of the human cost of war, and it made me reflect on my own journey. The days dragged on, and I started to lose hope. The enemy patrols were getting closer, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they found me. I had to keep moving, but I didn't want to abandon my only chance of contacting my allies. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I received a reply. The message was brief but clear. Help was on the way. Relief washed over me, and I knew I couldn't relax just yet. I had to stay vigilant to survive until my rescuers arrived. Chapter 6: Narrow Escapes. The enemy patrols were closing in, and I had to move fast. I had to leave the outpost despite the risk that whatever rescue would be sent will not find me anymore. But it was almost certain at this point I would be found if I remained here. Thus I continued my journey, leaving what was until recently almost certain rescue. I had to always keep an eye out for any signs of pursuit, and the terrain grew more and more treacherous. But I pressed on. Several times I barely escaped capture. I used every ounce of my training to evade the enemy, slipping through their traps and disappearing into the shadows. My supplies were dwindling, and exhaustion was taking its toll. But I refused to give up. I found myself moving through rugged mountains, the steep slopes and rocky terrain making every step a challenge. The air was thin and cold, and I struggled to keep my footing on the narrow paths. One night, as I rested in a small cave, I heard the distant sound of helicopters. The enemy was using every resource at their disposal to find me, and I knew I had to keep moving. I couldn't afford to be caught in the open. I was too vulnerable to their detection. I descended into the valley, using the dense foliage to hide my movements. The enemy's presence was everywhere, their patrols relentless in their search. I had to stay one step ahead, to use my wits and instincts to survive. Chapter 7: Reflection. One evening, as I rested in a hidden cave, I took stock of my situation. I had come so far, faced so many dangers, and yet I was still alive. The journey had forced me to confront my fears and doubts, to question my motivations and beliefs. I realized that I had enlisted not for glory or adventure, but because I believed in something greater than myself. The bonds I had formed with my comrades, the desire to protect my homeland, those were the reasons I fought. With renewed determination, I set out once more, my goal clear in my mind. I would find my way back, no matter what it took. As I moved through the landscape, I thought about my family, my friends, and the life I had left behind. The war changed everything, but I hadn't changed who I was at my core. I was a soldier, a protector, and I would fight to the end. The enemy's search continued, their patrols becoming more frequent and aggressive. I had to stay focused. I had to keep moving and avoid capture. The journey was far from over, but I was determined to see it through. Chapter 8. Reunion. The enemy was closing in. I knew I was running out of time. But then, one morning, I saw it. The front line of my allies in the distance. Tears of relief filled my eyes as I moved towards it, my pace quickening despite the pain and exhaustion. The enemy was right behind me, but I didn't care. I was so close. In a final burst of energy, I sprinted towards the front line, evading the last enemy hunting party. Shots rang out, but I kept moving, my focus solely on reaching safety. And then, I was there. Friendly faces greeted me, pulling me to safety. I collapsed, overwhelmed by exhaustion and relief. I had made it. I had survived. I was taken to the medical tent where they treated my injuries and gave me food and water. The familiar faces of my squad were a welcome sight, their relief and joy at my return evident. We had all been through so much, and the bond we shared was unbreakable. In the days that followed, I recovered my strength and prepared to rejoin the fight. The war was far from over, but I was ready. I had found my purpose and I would continue to fight for it. As I looked over the battlefield, I felt a sense of peace, out of all things. I knew that I was where I was meant to be, surrounded by my brothers in arms. Together, we would face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in our cause. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had shown me the strength within myself. I was a soldier, and I would keep fighting, no matter the cost. If you've enjoyed this story and would like to hear some more, do let us know in the comments below. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us a lot. Thanks.